Hey guys, and welcome to the show. So in our last video on custom form validation, we went into what it would take to properly define the sorts of data types that would be going into each of these fields. In today's video, we want to wrap it all up. We want to make sure that the form itself can define rules for what each input considers itself to be in a valid state. So in this example, as we see, we've got name, surname, age, password. Surname is optional, but for these other ones, if we click OK, you'll see they now say such and such is required. We type in something and let's try an age and put in a password. And once it's all right, we get this little pop-up. Now, before we begin, please make sure you are subscribed to this channel. Hit that bell notification icon. And if you want to see videos like this a couple days before everyone else, or just want to show your support, please check out my Patreon. I really do appreciate that. So without further ado, let's jump into the code. Okay, so this is right where we left off. What we want to do is create a button over there. Let's give it a sprites button, and we want to make sure that this doesn't do anything. So let's say image speed 0, and we'll have a step event here. We'll say image index equals good old position meeting mouse X, mouse Y, self question mark 1 0. If our mouse is over this object, it'll have image index 1, otherwise it'll be 0. So if we open up this button over here, there we go. So you can see that's normal, that's hover, pretty simple. Okay, so let's go back to object form. This is where all the action is happening. Now, similarly to how we were defining properties inside each text box over here, what we're going to do is we're going to define some validation properties. So let's first start with the validation message, and here we're going to say name is required, and let's copy that one down. Surname is not required, so we're going to skip that one. We're going to say age in years is required. I mean, you can make these as specific as you want. Password is required, and I think for this guy, let's just give it a blank. At a later stage, we can clean these up using some default properties. For example, in object text box, we can define some of these by default, and then we won't have to put them in again. Like max chars, we can set as 25, so that means you don't even have to supply those two, things like that. All right, so let's start up here with name. We've got our validation message. Next up, let's define a function called isValid, and if that returns true, then we know that the instance of this object is in a valid state. Now this one is very simple. We just want to return that string length of the text property is greater than 0. Quite simple. So long as you provide some sort of name, it should be okay. Then for our surname is not required. We can just say return true. Let's keep going down. What's next? Age. This one's a little bit more challenging, but basically we want something that says that the string length of text is greater than 0, but then also we want to say string length of string digits text equals string length of text. Now what this does is quite fancy. What string digits says is if I have a string like this, actually let me simplify that a little. Say I've got that string. If I pass it through to string digits, it'll spit out 672. So it'll delete these 3 characters in the beginning. So by checking if that mutation of the string text is the same as the entire length, we can approximate that what the user's entered is all a number. And then also let's say and string digits text is greater than 0. So we also want to check the value of that is not 0, because an age of 0 isn't valid. Do some indentation. That looks really nice. Okay, let's go to password. And I think password's going to be the same as the name. It just has to be present. Then we go down here and we're going to say instance create layer. I'm actually going to copy all of this. Let's steal this, put it over here. And this is going to be 350, a little bit lower. And that's going to be object button. And he doesn't need all these things. He just needs the form ID. And then we'll add that instance to the inputs. Now, while this is all very good, we don't really have a way to check each item on the form, and we don't want to have to delegate that to some other object. For example, the button. We don't want the button to go loop over its business. We want the form to handle its own functionality. So down here, also in the create event, I'm going to say validate equals function. Okay, and then here we're going to say form valid equals true. So let's assume that it's true and it's valid to start with. And we're going to loop over all our instances. Var I is equal to 0. I is less than ds list size. And that's the size of the inputs ds list. Let's put some spaces here. Okay, I++. And now we can go through each item. ds list find value of inputs I, and we can call valid equals is valid, and here we say if not valid, then form valid equals false. Okay, very cool. So validate function, it assumes the form is valid, then it loops over all the inputs in the ds list, it grabs each one individually, calls that version's is valid function, so remember that's these guys. Each one defines that function as its own use case, and then it says, well, if that's not valid, well, then the entire form isn't valid. So we can actually just take that and we can put it over here, and we don't need this extra piece over there. And then here at the bottom, I want to say, well, if the form is valid at this point, then we can just call success. Now, success isn't something that exists yet. So again, let's go over here, and we're going to say success equals function. And we want to show a little pop-up string with all the details. But for your story, this could mean going to a new page, saving user data, putting something in a database, hitting an API, giving a player extra lives, initializing the game, things like that. For var I equals 0, I is less than, okay, I think this is this guy again. We are just going to say str plus equals ds list find value like that dot text, and we'll put a new line character over there so it stacks everything. And then lastly we'll say show message str. I can actually get rid of these brackets, we don't need them if we've got a single line under that for. That needs to be not, sorry. Inputs. Okay. And you can see here the ID is telling us, well, we haven't used validate yet, which we know we haven't used because we haven't done anything that would cause it to validate or to cause this function, to call this function. So now we want to go into our button. Sorry, not the sprite. We want to go into the object, and here we're going to say mouse left pressed with form ID validate. Very cool, huh? And this form ID represents the reference to the form that this button exists on, and it's going to call this function validate. If we go back to form, that was this guy. So let's save this, let's run it and see what happens. Okay, cool. So there our button is. You can see how hover's working. Things we're looking for here is, well, if I click the button, it should show the validation message for 3 of those. The validation message should also change as I type things. And if I've succeeded in the validation, it should pop up with a summary of everything. So we're going to click OK. Okay, cool. We got our first error. That's fine. Here it says left press for object button doesn't know is valid. Okay, cool. So let's go back. That's down here. Oh, actually, I need to say valid equals is valid because we need that valid property. If I remember, in the text box itself, let's go see over here, right? Otherwise, we won't see anything. Valid. Let's do some alignment. Draw set H line. I can't remember these. FA center, yeah, that's the one. And then let's do draw set color. See, red sounds pretty good. Var MSG equals. So here we're going to say, well, if we have a validation message, then not equal to undefined. Then we're going to use it. Otherwise, we'll just say label plus something is required. So that's a bit of a default. And we'll draw this text. Let's do XY 40 maybe. That should be good. MSG. Alright, so if this text box is not valid, we do some alignment, set the color. We check if we have a validation message. If we don't, then it's going to just say whatever the label is, plus is required. If it does, then it's actually going to use that validation message. So let's save that. Let's go back. Try run again. Oh, right. Yeah, I need to initialize this on it, don't I? Let's just say valid is true. So we don't want that to show when the user's first going into the screen. Okay, cool. Let's try click OK. Alright, we still got this issue. What does it say? On an object is valid, not set before reading it. Create line 76. Okay. Back to our form. Oh, actually, that's the problem. It's because we've done this. Right, sorry, my bad. We don't actually add the button to the number of instances. Otherwise, it's going to try going to there, and that one obviously doesn't have any invalid. This one we just create straight with the link to the form ID. So DS list, remember the DS list of inputs is just so that we can handle the validation afterwards. Okay, cool. Let's try this again. Here we go. Let's try click OK. Ah, there we go. Boom. That's looking pretty nice. So let's see if we type something and we click OK. It goes away. Very nice. Let's try type random keys. That's perfect. Now try 77. That goes away. Nice. So it knows 77 is a real number. Put in a password. And there we go. Validation has succeeded. Now, while that is sort of working, I don't like that the validation doesn't reset as we type. That would be really nice. So for example, if we see validation, I want to be able to type and then have the validation disappear. You've seen that a lot online on websites. So people are mostly familiar with that. So let's go back to the text box. Let's go to key press any. Now in here, all we've got to do is after each key press, we just say valid equals is valid. So now you push a key, it goes and checks if that input's still valid. So you either stay in an invalid state or it says, hey, you are valid. So you don't have to keep pushing the OK button to test if you're valid. So for example, if I click OK, but now as soon as I start typing in here, boom, it says I'm now valid. If I type rubbish, no, 76, all good. Put something in there, click OK, we're fine. And if I put in a surname, actually let's put a real name in here. Jim Jones 76 password, boom. Jim Jones 76, plain text password, fantastic. But that is just how easy it is to go ahead and do validation. Now that is the end of this series. If you would like to continue to fiddle, what I would recommend you do next is go into this form and try extract some of these properties that we're using quite often into the actual text box itself. So for example, you'll notice a lot of these just say text type of text. So what if we were to go to the text box itself, go into the create, go to type here and default it to text, right? Then what you can do is in your form, anything that is text, you can get rid of it. And anything that isn't text, you can leave. So age is the one that's number, but the rest of them are text. If I save that and I run, it should behave the same as before. Jim Jones, there you go. Password works just fine. So you can extend that to pretty much anything. So private is another good candidate. Max character is another good candidate because we use a lot of 25s. Validation message again, because in the text box itself, in this draw event, we do use the label, so long as the label, which is the title of the input, has a good enough name. You don't even need to supply that either. That is how you can really shrink down that object forms create. So if you found this tutorial educational helpful, please feel free to comment, rate, and subscribe again. Check out my Patreon. I do appreciate your support. Project files are in the description. If you have any suggestions for future videos, let me know. Put those in the comments. Also in the comments, if you have any problems, errors while you're going through this, or just issues trying to put this into your own game, let us all know in the comments, and someone from the community or myself can help you out. So until next time, happy coding, and I'll see you then.